if people are coming in new, what is Heroine's Labyrinth and what are you creating?
So like most writers, I started understanding story structure with the hero's journey. I think I had some preliminary understanding of a 3-act structure. I think some things stretch it out to a 5-act structure, the rise, the climax, basic components of story structure. I studied, completely amateur, didn't even know how to apply it. I would just understand it conceptually. Then I would start writing and it had nothing to do with story structure at all. And then I got really focused on the hero's journey, which I loved. And I loved sitting down, I think really since the 90s, studying the hero's journey specifically. I would sit with a laptop or even a notebook pad in my lap. I would watch movies and I'd look for certain things. I'd hit pause, I'd write it down. And I couldn't believe how recurrent certain themes from the hero's journey were in stories. And so I have this vast index, I guess you would call it, of notes for the hero's journey. And I loved it. I got several books on the hero's journey, including Campbell's, which is very hard to read, by the way. The Hero with 1,000 Faces, very difficult.
It's a scholarly book. It's a scholarly book. It's a scholarly book. It's meant for academics. And the funny thing is, because I was a religion major in college, and in my senior thesis defense, I referenced that, and everyone all became very tense because scholars don't want to. They see that as poo-poo popular writing. I'm like, popular writing? Really? Nobody can understand that book.
Yeah, it's amazing because sometimes I'd be reading this universally understood concept today, and I was like, how did they even get this concept out of what he wrote? It doesn't even sound like he's talking about some of the things he's talking about. So anyway, it was a very difficult book. So I had all these notes, and I've attempted to write for a long, long time, over almost 2 decades, actually going all the way back to 6th grade, really. But it's hard. It's hard to use story structure effectively unless you practice a lot. So when I started writing my what eventually became my debut novel, I fully intended to use the hero's journey. I structured out my story. I laid it out. It seemed to make sense. And of course, Kamran, I'm sure when you start writing the story, can often go in a direction you don't intend it. Characters start behaving differently. And the hero's journey quickly broke down about a third into the story. And I was like, oh, no problem. I'll just find the feminine version of the hero's journey. And that is like opening Pandora's box because everyone has something to say about this. There's a lot of treatises on this. There are other theories on this. A lot of it is there's a lot of feminist literary criticism. There is good-hearted attempts to address this, but none of them really gave me the nice, easy, concise, usable structure that the hero's journey gave me. And some of the things, it was hard to apply. It sounds like some things only seem to apply to romance novels, for example, and I couldn't figure out how to apply it in these other settings. And a lot of them, they might address an action movie, but they didn't address like literature, like from the 18th century, where heroines aren't going anywhere. They're just staying in their home in some cases. So anyway, I began to watch all my favorite movies again. Then I started watching all the movies I needed to watch where the hero as the lead. I began rereading novels from across the board. This took a total of 5 years of just constant, consuming of this to study. And the notes I took to help me write The Faraway Bird, I thought became really something distinctive from the hero's journey, which I still love. I'm not anti-hero's journey. Another thing that's a little different, a lot of people that promote heroine-centric stories or heroine-centric storytelling, sometimes they bash the hero's journey, and I think unfairly. So this book, the Heroine's Labyrinth, is my best effort to lay out what I think is an alternative model that holds up on an archetypal level across a broad spectrum of heroine-centric stories. And while it may be feminine in its dynamism, it is also transcendent of gender. There are several stories, big ones, that have males as the lead, and they follow the heroine's labyrinth. Rambo, Fight Club, The Game with Michael Douglas is another. So there's a bunch. Batman. A lot of these stories will also follow the heroine's labyrinth, even though it's a male.
And we maybe at some point over to today's conversation we'll explore why that is. My instinct, just off the top of my head, my instinct is because those are journeys, even though they're with male heroes, masculine heroes, those are journeys that are psychological journeys. And I think that much of what the genius of what you've uncovered here is a psychological journey, right? And we can talk about that.
Well, you actually pointed out, Kamran, I used a certain image of a maze called the Chakra Vyuha. It's a maze made in India. It's a beautiful looking maze, and it's a very specific one. Funny enough, doing my research, I didn't realize how many spirals and mazes there were, like specific ones. And the shock review is interesting because, like I said, it's an asymmetrical but beautiful pattern. And Kamran noted that it also looks like the human brain. And it never left my head that a maze is quite obviously, once he said it, also a metaphor for human psychology. And so I think that there's a massive crossover. I think what you said is correct. A massive crossover between the intricacies of a native culture, social rules, and some of the things that you might deal with without going out on a massive adventure, and human psychology. Very subtle and cerebral issues that cause conflicts and drive dramatic incidents in chapters and scenes. So I think that's an incredible observation, and you helped me see that.
Well, and I want to actually say that I had the incredible privilege of reading an early draft of this book. Douglas, a member of my Patreon, he asked me to look at it as sort of a formal consult, and people send me screenplays, they send me books. And this is the first time I've been asked to look at really something that wasn't a story, but about storytelling. It was essentially, it was, I wouldn't say an academic work, but it's an analytical work, right? And so I said, sure, I'll take a look at it. And, I'll be honest with you, I was just blown away. I was like, what is this thing? I mean, this is a work of genius, and he's uncovered something that intuitively feels right. I mean, I gave you a few critiques and a few tweaks here and there. Yeah. But basically, I said, this thesis is right, and I've never seen this thesis ever presented in this form. And I said, you've just opened up a new conversation about storytelling, which hasn't happened in decades. And I'm not exaggerating here. This book has changed how I perceive, and I primarily write female heroines. I mean, I have multiple novels published with them. My screenplays largely are female-led. And I realized that I was following this pattern unconsciously without realizing it.
Unconsciously, exactly. That's the beauty of it. And by the way, I am a member of Kamran's Patreon and a proud member of it. And Kamran, I knew that if I was way off in some ditch somewhere, he would be the guy to tell me, because quite honestly, strict, honest, blunt feedback is very hard to come by. And I knew Kamran was going to give me that, and he did. But when he said some other things too that were very complimentary, and it really boosted my confidence in following through with this all the way. So anyway, so for that, I thank you, by the way.
Well, I want to point out that, we have talked about also on this channel and in these discussions quite a bit, the difference between masculine and feminine and male and female. So we've talked, when we've been analyzing stories, we've talked about a lot, like hero stories that actually have men in them that are following a heroine's journey, and then also stories that are female centric but are following a masculine story structure and things. So we mix all of that up here as well. So that's all we've talked about that.
Yeah, and that's authentic. These are, unfortunately, these terms have become politicized in the last 5 years. But prior to that, people were aware, or at least maybe other cultures were aware, that there is a masculine and a feminine polarity of energy, and there are certain attributes that come within that energy, and that people within a physical body with different genitalia can express different aspects of that range of energies. It's been a bizarre conversation for the last decade over it, but I'm glad we can talk about it in an intelligent fashion here.
Yeah, and I agree with you. One of my initial worries was that because there was any sort of heroine or gender-related words at all, that this would be rejected. But I think in reality, there are feminine and masculine energies out there, and I also think that there are several things that are transcendent of that as well.